Morning everyone, and welcome to today's T4S SME Live Summit. Today's focus is very much on helping you lead your business as we move into a post-lockdown phase. So today we're going to be looking at what you need to include in your roadmap to recovery and what steps you need to be taking now to plan for the future. So my name is Siobhan Lavelle, and I'm a specialist in reputation management, change and crisis communications, and I'm going to be guiding us through our session today. You'll see that everyone is on mute, and this is so that we can all hear our speakers clearly, but please don't let that stop you asking questions. You can use the Q&A feature to submit your questions as we go through, and I'll share these with our speakers on your behalf. Please also, if you'd like to, you can use the chat function to share your thoughts on our discussion, or if you want to post any links or information that you think would be useful for everyone taking part in today's summit. So this is a special session, which is going to recap on some of the areas we explored earlier in the webinar series. We've gathered together our panel of experts, plus a couple of new faces, to give their views on where we are now, and to consider how businesses need to be planning ahead. I'm briefly going to introduce everyone, and then we'll hear more from each panelist in due course. So I'd like to start by welcoming all of our panelists. You can hopefully see everybody on your screen. First of all, we have Alison Lambert. So Alison is Director and Strategic HR Consultant at Commissioning HR. She's also Chair of the CIPD for Devon and Cornwall. Welcome, Alison. Next, we have Daniel White. So Dan is Technology, Innovation and Growth Specialist and Director of Business Services at Bishop Fleming Chartered Accountants. We also have with us Vikram Kamerkar. Vikram is a partner at Minerva Lifelong Learning and a former director at Ernst & Young. We have Dan Pritchett with us, and Dan is Managing Director of Astley Media. He's a CIPR advanced practitioner, and he's co-founder of Tech Southwest. Next, we have Ryan Huxtable. Ryan is a customer experience specialist for Insight 6, and he's former head of retail for Boots UK. And we have Tom Charters-Moore. Tom is an associate solicitor in the IP and IT team at Stephen Scone. There he heads up the firm's food and drink team, and he's also a non-exec director of Food Drink Devon. And last but by no means least, we have Julian Wills. Julian is a technology and IT specialist. He is managing director of Timewade, and he is founder of Technology for Success. So I'd like to begin by welcoming back Julian. Hello, Julian.
Morning Siobhan, morning everyone.
How are you?
Yeah, very good, thank you. Very good.
Good. So Julian, you have been at the cutting edge of supporting businesses through lockdown with their technology needs. Can you just talk us through what Technology for Success is all about, and perhaps share some of your insights and perspective on what businesses have needed during lockdown?
Yeah, sure, definitely. So I think if we go back to sort of last year, really, when we formed Technology for Success, we formed it on the premise that we believe that there's a sort of productivity gap in the UK, and that technology really should be used and could be used to help close that gap and help businesses gain productivity, to help them grow and kind of improve processes, etc. So we wanted to kind of build a group that allowed us to share ideas and hear from other businesses on how they're using technology successfully within their businesses to help drive their growth, and also sort of in and around help build a sort of strategic approach around a roadmap for technology, which we believe is really important for every business as we move forward. I think when we started the group, we were meeting up at the Science Park, and obviously as the COVID hit us, we kind of transitioned into this webinar series, which sort of focused on really practical tips that were kind of pertinent and timely as we were sort of moving through those initial phases. And we were supported brilliantly by our partners, all of which are with us today again. We've also launched the LinkedIn business group, and today I'm really excited to launch our new Tech for Success website, which is www.technologyforsuccess.co.uk, which is again supported by our partners, where we hope to bring together all of the practical advice that we're learning and sharing on this journey, I guess. And hopefully it'll be a resource for businesses to use and kind of get involved in and contribute to as we move forward. We've also launched a new survey which is based on how businesses have used technology and how they've successfully sort of transitioned over this period, and what's worked and what hasn't worked. And we've got some kind of the initial findings, which I'll share a little bit later on as we go on. There's some quite interesting stats that are coming out of that so far. But if you haven't already, I really urge everybody who's on the call to take the survey, because I think that the more data that we get, the more meaningful it will be moving forward. I guess sort of finally we've seen at the beginning of COVID a kind of a sort of almost a mass sort of panic in terms of, okay, how do we address, how do we get working remotely, those types of things. And whilst a lot of that was done very quickly, I think now is the time where some of the work that was done needs to be, that wasn't necessarily thought through as much as everybody would have liked. So it's time to kind of really assess that and make sure that we're doing everything we can to help us come out of lockdown, in the most successful sort of manner that we can. I'd also, just again, before we actually begin, like to thank all of our partners for their continued support, and sort of say, look, I firmly believe that technology is the key to helping us through this pandemic, and that it's never been more important to have a technology strategy that considers every aspect of your business. So that's it, introduction for me. Thank you everybody again for joining, and I'm really looking forward to the discussion.
Thank you, Julian. So we are going to bring the rest of our panel into the discussion shortly. They're all sitting there very patiently at the moment, waiting to be called upon with very difficult questions. Before we do that, though, we're going to set the scene a little bit and just take a moment to consider what this post-lockdown world looks like. We are, as Julian just said, we've moved very swiftly. We're moving into a new phase now. So we're going to just take a moment and think about what that looks like. Then after our panel discussion, we're going to look ahead to think about what we need to be doing now to prepare for what's coming. So just a quick reminder, please do use the Q&A function for your questions, which we're going to put to the panelists as we go through our discussions today. If you've been on previous webinars, you'll know that we held a lot of the questions to the end. We're doing it differently today. So ask your questions as they come to mind, and I'll put them to the panelists on your behalf. So we have just passed 100 days since lockdown began, and SMEs have had to adapt so much to respond to the impact of COVID-19. And I don't know about you, but it still feels to me like things are changing around us almost daily. The latest developments for Leicester this week show that things might go backwards into further lockdowns, as well as moving forwards. The impact has just been colossal. We're hearing about job losses, businesses really struggling to deal with opening up while following those essential measures to protect staff and members of the public. But what we've seen this week is a very strong message from the UK government, and their message, I think, is absolutely clear. We're being encouraged to be ambitious, and they want nationwide investment in infrastructure and other projects to drive job creation and really get the economy moving again. So more details on this are going to follow, no doubt, but what we've seen this week really is a government roadmap. It's a forward-looking plan to counteract the economic consequences of coronavirus and move toward building a stronger future. So the concept of a roadmap is a model that every business owner needs to think about, especially now. So Vikram and Julian, I'd like to come to you both first and ask your thoughts on this. So how is a roadmap going to help SMEs in this post-lockdown world that we're now entering? And what sort of things should business leaders be including in their own roadmaps? Vikram, Julian. Julian, why don't you answer first?
Yeah, I think it goes without saying that I think having having a roadmap and a strategy and a plan for anything in business is vitally important. And I think it's no doubt about it. We're going to be, unfortunately, we're in for a tough few months, I think. But I think, the good news is that technology can help with that. I'm sure it can make a difference. And I think if we reflect back a little bit on what we saw with businesses as we went into lockdown, and we saw a huge difference between the businesses that had a very strategic approach around technology for the business and those that didn't. And the ones that did were able to adapt more quickly in a much more structured way. And I think, found that they had less problems, and perhaps they've made things easier for themselves as we start to go out. I think, it's really important as well that any roadmap that you produce kind of covers every aspect of your business. It's really important to consider everything from people, suppliers, customers, finance, sales and marketing, etc. And for me, what we have to be asking ourselves is, how can technology help in each of those areas? And so I think, Vikram, this is what you do, isn't it? And how, what's your opinion in terms of how far we should be thinking forward and planning, and who should be leading this?
Thanks a lot, Julian. I'm actually going to take a bit of a step back from that question and to do a very quick history lesson, because it'll put all of this into better context before I answer your question, if you don't mind, Julian. So when I was doing my research for this webinar, the big aha moment I had is that for the last 300 odd years, every 100 years we've had a pandemic. So, we got coronavirus now. We had Spanish flu in the 1920s. We had cholera in the 1820s, and we had the plague in the 1720s. And after every major pandemic like that, what came out is major change, and a major way of how people worked and interacted with each other. So whether you look at Art Deco as a form of art in the 1920s, to my favorite, which is Newton left Cambridge in 1720, went up to his home up in the north of England, sat in an apple orchard one summer afternoon, and came up with the theory of gravity. And so for me, that's very, very telling. After every major pandemic, there is major change, and you need to understand that the normal, what you consider as normal, will change. Now, if we flip that into what are some of the key lessons learned, is that we're not going to return to what a lot of us quite rightly feel we want to go back to the way things were, because it's been a horrible time for a lot of people. But it's for a number of businesses, things won't be back to normal. Expectations have changed in terms of what people want. It's if you think about Captain Tom and the money he raised, it's a clear example of how we've all changed in terms of a much more community-based thinking rather than individualistic approach. We've also proved that working from home and remote working works. So this whole point about local businesses no longer is applicable. You need to think much wider than that. So now, answering your point, what should we be doing about this? I think there's a two-step approach to this. The first step is very clearly what I call the hygiene factors of your business. So, we've got some great people like Dan and Alison and Tom that can speak to what are some of the things you need to do immediately to keep your business afloat. So it could be anything from managing your cash flow to technology in your area to returning to work procedures that Alice can talk about. But then looking forward, it's about building a strategy for what's the new normal and understanding that. And I'll give you a great simple example. I've been using a travel company in India for the last 30 odd years, so kind of showing my age here, for all my travel in India and actually even across the globe, because they provide an absolutely fantastic service. What they've done actually during the lockdown is use technology to change how they approach their customers. So they've decided during the lockdown that they no longer want to be a local company just based in Pune, where that nobody's heard about. They want to be an international travel company. That means they want to grow internationally. And that's their strategy for the next 10 to 15 years. And as part of their strategy to engage with people, I now get weekly WhatsApp messages on my phone, where they've set up a whole series of webinars. So they're talking about Exploring India is a set of online workshops that take you through marvelous stories that make India. Every session covers topics ranging from history to culture to monuments and architecture. And they brought together educators, historians, travel writers, theatre professionals, and storytellers. Now, they're going out and engaging with their customers in a completely new way to what they would have done 5 years ago. And this is the kind of step change in terms of really understanding what's changed, where do you want to play, what's your strategy, and then developing steps along that way to go and deliver that. Does that kind of answer the question, Julian, or is there something?
Yeah, no, I think, yeah, absolutely. I couldn't agree more. You know, it's so vital to think differently, and we're starting to see that as well. So I absolutely agree with that.
And I think a part of this, and another key aspect around all of this, is paying attention to your team, because I think certainly from quite a lot of business leaders I've talked to, they're beginning to find that their team is as invested in their business as they are. And it's kind of a mild aha moment for a lot of people. And they can help with that thinking and a different approach. So it's about creating that two-way street of how can you gather ideas and not owning everything yourself.
Absolutely, couldn't agree more. And we've actually seen, specifically around remote working, businesses go from have a complete role sort of reversal on this, where 3-4 months ago the idea of any of their staff working remotely was just a no-go. There was you know, mass fear that productivity would drop. You know, they'd be off walking their dogs instead of doing the work, etc. And I think this has just proven this whole you know, unfortunate, you know, situation we're in, but it's proven, it's dispelled all those myths, and talks about how invested people really are in businesses is certainly what we've found. Brilliant. Okay. I guess probably time to move on a little bit now.
Julian, I think I know you've done a survey. You mentioned earlier that you did a survey with SMEs, and you've got some results to share with us, I think. Are you going to do that now?
Yep. So I won't spend too long on here, but just some initial findings that I think are an emerging trends that I think were, you know, quite pertinent to share. So I think as we moved into lockdown, almost 60% of businesses sort of said that connectivity has been an issue or been a challenge for them and for their staff. And so I think that's really important and something that we're going to have to consider moving forward, and perhaps think outside the box a little bit more. You know, there are lots of technology solutions that can help us, not just home broadband. So there's lots of things that we need to be thinking about. But it's also great to hear from the government earlier this week that they're going to bring forward further investment in full fibre broadband as well, which I think will be, you know, critical to what will be the new normal as we move forward with much more flexible working, etc. I think perhaps more worryingly, what it's shown is that only 35% of businesses sort of were thinking about cybersecurity as a very high priority as we went into sort of the start of the COVID period. That's quite worrying, and I think it's something that will possibly come back and bite a few people. There's been a huge increase in cyber attacks over this period, and a massive increase of data breaches that have been reported to the ICO. So I think that's something that definitely needs to jump back up the priority list. I think it's also kind of no surprise really that communication tools came out on top in terms of use and growth, and we've seen a sort of threefold increase in that. And I think that's backed up by stats like Microsoft. They had a 5-year plan to take their daily usage of Teams users from 25 million users per day to 85 million users per day. They managed to achieve that in a month, which is just quite phenomenal growth, but also talks to how reliable technology can be given the right sort of strategy and things in place to help achieve that. But as we started to ask about more questions around sort of thinking about moving out of COVID in post-lockdown, good to see that cybersecurity is jumping back up to sort of 70%. I think that needs to be still pushed higher, in my opinion. But also 100% of businesses say that remote working and anytime access to system will be an extremely high priority for them as they move forward. I think on a positive note, 70% of businesses that responded have also identified new business opportunities, which I think is really encouraging. As I said earlier, I think we're in for a very tough time, and being creative and spotting new opportunities and kind of being brave and ambitious are sort of part of the components that businesses are going to need to succeed as we move forward. So, like I say, that's a really sort of brief roundup of the initial data. But I'd urge you, if you haven't already, please take the survey.
Yeah, thanks for that, Julian. It's such an interesting mix of different developments, some positive potentially for businesses and others really quite daunting and difficult to handle. So it's really interesting to see that data presented. We've had a couple of comments which are great, so thank you for those. Generally, one comment's coming supporting Vikram's perspective that it's really important to get that deep understanding of how much things have changed, and that's really fundamental to planning and projecting the way forward for your business. We've also had a question that I'd like to put to Vikram before we move on, which is how differently are people working now, and how is that going to impact us going forward? Are people used to not working as hard as they used to, for example? And I think I'm not going to question whether that's true or not, but for some people, their working patterns have changed. Commuting hours might not be quite as prevalent as they used to. Also, we're working very differently in terms of the hours. It's not 9 to 5 anymore. So the question really is around what constitutes work, and has that changed for the future? Vikram, would you like to just come back on that?
Sorry, I was on mute there, forgot. That's a fairly complex answer, so I'm going to try and keep it short because I do have a tendency for verbal diarrhea. But very, very quickly, informal, feedback from a number of people I've talked to is actually productivity's gone up because people aren't commuting and are working flexible hours. They're actually getting more done. Now, I don't know whether that's because of, because they're at home and they can work around their family commitments and making dinner, looking after kids and all the rest, or because people are just more concerned about their company surviving. I think that's only going to come out through the wash over the next few months. But what's very clear is people actually have been as productive, if not more productive than before. But I think an emerging aspect around this is the fact that we don't need to think about people being local anymore. You can be based up in Northamptonshire working for a company down in the southwest, and as long as you're getting those connections, those cultural and team connections going, it's possible to work remotely. and build up connections over time. So I think it's still very early to figure out exactly where the balance is going to be between remote working and office-based working, like I said in my comments. But I think the trend towards understanding that technology is going to be a fundamental part of the way we work, as well as flexible remote, and over time heading into what I call virtual working. And the clear difference between virtual working and just remote or flexible working is what I call the collaborative aspect of how we work. Now, collaboration is much more than cooperation or teamwork. Collaboration is like the other two, like teamwork or even cooperation is, yes, you have common goals, but how you achieve those common goals is very, very different, because you could be working across different teams, across different companies, in a way to say, we have a shared goal, but we don't have a team leader. We agree as a group that we have these agreed group goals, and we're going to work with each other to go and figure those out and make something happen. And it's such an important new way of working that Julian can talk about this a bit more, but I know Microsoft is actually developing a whole new document standard called just based on collaboration. So, you know, we have Word and we have Excel and we have PowerPoint. They're just developing a new format that is just specializing in collaboration.
Yeah, I think you're exactly right there, Vikram. And you know, what we're also seeing is all of these different technologies kind of being linked together, and the idea is around sharing that data, making it easier to access and update and collaborate on. Really, you know, I think a lot of it is kind of there now, and a lot of people have access to it right now as well, but they're not actually using it, and I think that's the key thing. Key thing businesses need to think about in terms of when they're looking at their strategies moving forward. How do they make the most use of technology that sometimes they already have? I think that's going to be really interesting, and I'm really keen to see how that develops even further over the coming months.
Thank you both. So we'd like to launch a quick poll now as a bit of a temperature check for how everyone is feeling about their businesses post-lockdown. So you should see that on your screen now. So please take a moment to answer this question. How prepared is your SME for the post-lockdown world? So if you could just take a moment, register your thoughts on that, and we will share the results with you shortly. So I'm now going to put some questions to each of our panel members. We have had a few questions on the Q&A, on the chat. Please keep them coming. And in the meantime, Alison, can I come to you first with a question? So Vikram and Julian have talked about who needs to lead this post-lockdown recovery and what that looks like. But how do you engage your whole organisation, particularly now when you might have some staff members who are still working remotely and will continue to do so? You might have staff members still on furlough and coming back at different times. How do you engage the whole organisation going forward from here?
Yeah, brilliant question, Siobhan, and great conversations there between Julian and Vikram. I think I was dying to chip in at some stage. But yeah, the question about how do you engage the whole organisation is a really key one. And I think above all, you need to just be honest in your communications. And you need to be inclusive as well. So you need to, you know, obviously with technology and other platforms, you need to think about your methods for communication. But absolutely, you need to keep communicating and checking in with your whole organisation. But then also think about within that, there are going to be teams and groups of people that are going to be working together. But also separately on an individual basis. I'd always say it's absolutely key to know your employees as individuals, and that's never been more important than now, because you will not understand what an individual has been going through, and they might not yet until they come out the other end. So, you know, you'll have people that have been continuing to work, you'll have people that have been working harder, you'll have people that have been furloughed, unable to work, you might have people that have actually had symptoms of COVID during this time. You might have employees that have a close relative or somebody that they know that has had COVID, and you might have people that have actually even suffered a bereavement. So all of that picture is really, really important in then how you go about your communications. And of course, one of the things that Vikram's touched on, which I've seen absolutely massively around the Southwest, is this big community success story. And out of that, I think organisations are learning about how the community operates and how the community engages. So I think we can adapt and we can learn from that. And I think it's really important to share success stories. So the community have been sharing that success story really, really successfully. And they perhaps use different platforms than you do in business. I think community tends to use Facebook more. I've never seen more businesses pop up on Facebook. But for your business, it's really important to share those success stories, but also share your challenges. So again, it's back to that point about being honest. It's painting that picture of where are we now, what are we struggling with, and what do we need from our employees to help us. And I think it was also touched on about how we've never seen more clearly how loyal our employees are. And I think that's really true. We've seen people really step up now and have that kind of like sense of belonging and that sense of it's my organisation too, and I want to take it forward. So some of the things that you can do is you kind of have, you know, government, we all talk about bubbles now. So perhaps you can have kind of like virtual work bubbles. So you can perhaps split off into projects. You can have a returning to work bubble where people that have got those kind of skill sets and those interests all collaborate together to think about how are we going to return to work safely. You can have a work bubble about diversification. So you know that your business needs to adapt and do something differently. So get the best people together that are good at doing that and want to do that. You can have a bubble about business recovery. So put a team together about looking about business recovery, what that looks like. And also really, really highly important is that well-being and check-in bubble, because you're going to have people out there that are struggling, and it might not be their traditional manager that is the best person to help them through that. You might have somebody in your organisation that has struggled and come through it themselves, and they might be the best person to team up with somebody else. So it's that, you know, it's really understanding your people, understanding their needs, understanding their strengths, and then looking to your employees and saying, where are they best effective and where can they best contribute? And then above all that as well, try and do something fun. Try and do something fun that engages the whole organisation. You know, we've seen all these kind of like pop-up pub quizzes and all those kinds of things going on. You know, at some stage we're going to be able to meet again outside. So do you meet up in a park and do some kind of activity in a park that's still social distancing, that engages everybody? So I think it's really a case of being creative, being honest, and being inclusive. So I've waffled on a lot there. There's a lot to say, but
Look, I've got my pencil in my hand because I've been taking notes. I think that's absolutely brilliant, and you've shared some really good value there in your answer. And it's kind of remembering that human side, isn't it? And you know, we've got our business needs, but we've got to remember the human side and our human needs as well. So I think you've expressed that really well.
Absolutely.
So thank you for that.
One of the things that I always say, Siobhan, is that you don't stop being you when you turn up to work. And everybody needs to recognise that.
Yeah, that's really valuable, and that's a really good point to kind of take forward as we go forward into whatever the future brings. And you know, because there may be difficult times ahead, and hopefully fun to come as well. But thank you, Alison. So I'd now like to move on to Dan, if I may. So Dan White. Dan, these are clearly tough times. This could go on for some time into the future. How can businesses plan when there is so much uncertainty all around us?
Yeah, it's a good question and a great point. It's never easy to plan. It's impossible to see the future. So you know, when things are stable and things are occurring and your business is the same and everything's boring and steady, things are easy. But when times are tough, when you're having to change what you do, it's very difficult to plan. And the ironic thing is, that's when it's most important to get your planning right. I think we've had some great comments earlier about planning and how important it is. And obviously the financial impact of all of that stuff is very important as well. So I guess I just want to emphasize point, it's not easy, particularly at the minute. There's a lot of uncertainty at the minute. You know, you stick on the TV, depending on what news channel you watch, people have different opinions, people make different points. I think locally, a lot of things I like to look at is the property market, for example. I think that there's been a really good trend from what I've seen of how the property market's performing in the last month. So from a local economy point of view, that gives me a lot of hope. People are spending money, people are willing to go out and buy properties. And I think that there's some proof in the fact that a lot of that might have started before lockdown and people just wanted to carry on with it. But I know from speaking to local solicitors, and Tom might be able to verify this, that there's been a massive surge in files opening in the last month, which is just fantastic to show that the economy is still going. Interestingly, next week, Rishi Sunak is doing his, I think he's called it a summer economic update, which in my words is an emergency budget. So what's going to come out of that is, who knows? People are talking about tax cuts or increase in taxes. You know, again, depending on who you listen to, they just don't know. There is a common trend, actually, I think is very important for this group, in that there's some inside knowledge that they're going to focus on 3 areas, which is training, green energy, and technology. So the Chancellor is very much going to be pushing technology within his budget and funding that. He's already put some great funding options in there with the Future Fund to allow tech businesses to kind of get support they need at the minute and grow and take advantage of the opportunities that come from change. So I think, although there's a lot of uncertainty, as you mentioned, Sean, there's also a lot of opportunities that come with uncertainty. So I guess just to touch on a planning point, there's a phrase that most people have heard: cash is king. It's very easy to kind of get carried away with what we think your profit's going to be. Have we got these sales? You know, what's our future trends going to be? But at the minute, when times are hard, businesses need to keep a very close eye on their cash flow. So yes, it might be great to sign up all these new clients, but if we haven't got the cash coming in straight away and you've got to pay your employees for doing that work, you're going to get yourself in trouble. So I would say, as times are changing, keep planning, keep revisiting your plan. You know, at the minute, I would say that plans could change and your outlook can change every couple of weeks. Certainly after next week's budget, you're going to have to revisit your plan, because if a VAT rate changes, for example, that's going to have a massive impact on your cash flow. So look long term, but I appreciate that as you're looking long term, you can't be certain. So a little piece of advice just before I finish off. I think that for the short term, so maybe within the next couple of months, you can be a bit more confident in what's going to happen because you can follow certain trends. And then I think as you look further forward, you have to make some assumptions, you have to make some estimates. You know, nobody can look that far forward, but as you come closer to the current day, I think you can be a bit more confident in what you're saying. So, and then when you get a month down the line into your plan and you're looking at month 2, you can then maybe revisit that and from looking at what's happened in your first month and just change your plan. You know, just keep changing it, keep updating it, stay on top of your cash flow, and speak to people. Yeah, there's a lot of different business owners that you might know that we're going through the same thing. You know, it might be a different industry, but the community point that's been raised a couple of times today, I've seen that so much in the last couple of months with my clients. Everyone is really chipping and trying to help each other, and it's really inspiring to watch. So I think don't be afraid to put your hand up and ask for help, and ask for advice, because there'll be people that are going through what you've been through, might even be just a week ahead of you on the curve, and they'll be able to give some brilliant insight.
Dan, thank you. I think that's really, really interesting. And I think we probably all agree that our Southwest business community is really strong, and there are people out there with great experience and great advice, and also very willing to listen and help each other out. So thank you for that. So we're going to come to our poll results in just a couple of minutes, but before we do that, I'm going to ask Vikram to give us a fairly brief answer, if you wouldn't mind, to this question. You know where I'm coming from, don't you, Vikram? I could listen to you all day, but the clock is ticking. So the world of work has changed significantly. We are talking about that constantly at the moment, and people are having to adapt. But how can you help your team become more adaptable to change and the changing needs of your customers?
That's a great question. Thanks, Siobhan. For me, it's about having adaptive skills. Now, adaptive skills are a kind of subset of soft skills, and they're amongst the hardest to develop because it requires both a change in your skills, but also your mindset or behavior. So let me give you some simple examples. Creativity and problem solving are skills that we have constantly learned, but not in any formal sense. And my brother, who works at Amazon, is actually now got a formal program for all 250 of his team across all of Asia to actually go and develop creativity skills and follow through on that, so that 3 years from now, 5 years from now, he as as an exec in Amazon can turn around to his superiors and say, look at what my team have produced. But what he recognizes is that there is a certain stretch both in his mentality in terms of accepting new ideas, but also creating an environment where you generate new ideas. So there's a whole aspect around creativity, problem solving, working with other people. And this is not just teamwork. This goes back to the collaboration point I made. To be able to collaborate well, you've got to be able to communicate well, both verbally and written. And as you're going through all of that, you've got to have emotional skills because you've got to put yourself in someone else's shoe. And I'm sure Alison can talk plenty about EQ and all the rest, much better than I can. But when you've got EQ, Ryan can talk very well about how that affects customers. And you understanding where the customer is coming from, not just presenting, your own professional view of it. The computer says no. So companies that invest in people developing those skills are the ones that absolutely rocket ahead. And I've been very, very lucky in the fact that I've worked in companies that have super invested in people's skills. And as a result, that's why they were so successful. And you can almost see the difference in companies that have invested in people consistently for a while to companies that just hire people to fill a gap and then get disappointed.
Thank you. Yeah, I think that's a great answer, Vikram. It's a short-term plus a long-term solution, isn't it? So definitely something that businesses should be thinking of. Thank you. I'd just like to share the results of our first poll now, and hopefully these have popped up on your screen. So that's interesting. Actually, a lot of people are feeling well prepared, some feeling very well prepared, which is excellent. The balance of responses do show that people are moderately prepared, and I think that's encouraging, actually. We don't have anybody who doesn't feel that they are completely unprepared, and I think that's a really good sign of the way people are thinking forward, and hopefully by the end of this call we'll help you kind of move forward and feel even more prepared than you do now. So thank you for that. We're going to launch our second poll before we move on, so you should see that question popping up any minute now, and that question is going to be what is your biggest challenge right now? There we go. So we've given some very top line kind of brackets of what those challenges might be, but we thought this would kind of give us a good insight into the areas that people are looking to focus on going forward, and that might be a real priority for you within your business. So do take a moment to share your thoughts there, and we will come back to those answers shortly. So let's move on now. Dan Pritchard, can I come to you now, please? Marketing, huge area, and if you could give me an answer perhaps to the following question, I think it would be useful. How important is marketing to businesses right now?
Well, very important. I mean, switching off marketing, I guess, is like switching off the tap. You have your existing customers, and that is a priority when times are tough, and you kind of wrap your services and wrap your love around them. But we're talking on this summit about trying to be more long-term in your thinking, and the marketing has to be part of that. And I don't just mean about, marketing in terms of talking about yourself. It's about, people know who you are and what you do, but it's doing great things right now in the times that we're in. Several people have mentioned community, being part of community, doing the right thing for your own people, for your customers, for your potential customers. Actually, that's what's going to make you stand out. That's what people are going to remember. So, and the digital piece has obviously grown enormously, and people are transitioning to that and pivoting, which is great. But that's just your baseline, that's your platform, and you've got to be proactive. You've got to think about marketing in the wider sense, in terms of opportunities, connections, campaigns, partnerships, developing new products for the market. And of course that market may have changed. Your customers are not in the same position as they were, and don't make assumptions about that, because other people will be looking in your area, and they will be moving faster potentially, and they will be making decisions, and they will be acting, and they may have bigger budgets. So you've got to be really clever, really creative with your time. And if you park it, say, well, we're just going to hold on to what we've got, that's how it gets eroded. And you look at the recovery after the 2008 crisis, those who kind of focused on and invested in the right way and were clever with their marketing are the ones that came out stronger. And that ties in with your customer kind of experience piece. It ties in with how you're going to use technology. It ties in with all these different areas, of course. But yeah, I mean, the message and what we're seeing is those we're getting new projects coming on board, which is fantastic. For those who recognise now is the time to plan and prep and come out stronger. And it's hard because budgets are tight and there's a lot of uncertainty, but that doesn't mean you shouldn't try.
Thank you. That's really interesting. That we've obviously got to keep on marketing, but recognise how much things have changed, and think about how we can do the best in this new normal circumstances. So I think that leads really nicely onto a question for Ryan. So Ryan, there are some big challenges now to that customer relationship, and there have been since lockdown began. How do SMEs put the focus back on to their customers when there is still so much change and uncertainty going on around us?
Yeah, thanks, Siobhan. I mean, that's a great question. What's been really interesting listening to the panelists so far is this consistent theme about planning, whether that be financial, whether that be with your team, whether that be with your marketing strategy. But what I always find really, really interesting, right, when I talk to clients or I talk to associates about their plan, and we've talked to many in the last few months, the customer experience element of that plan is always a bit of a footnote, or can often be a bit of a footnote. And to Vikram's point, businesses that are incredibly successful after terrible situations that we find ourselves in at the moment are those that understand their customers and understand what their customers want on the other side. And technology has a huge part to play in helping a business understand what their customers want. And there are a litany of examples at the moment of big businesses, big international businesses that are completely disregarding what their customer experience looks like and what their customers want. And it is jaw-dropping for me to see how some businesses are treating their customers. You only have to look at, for example, the airline industry, for example, who are flagrantly breaking the law by not refunding customers money for a holiday that they can no longer take because they're citing cash flow as an issue. So, and there is being real damage done to customer relationships between brands at the moment, brands and their customers at the moment. We've done a lot of research and insight to even basic things like how customers are able to access websites, phones, etc. at the moment, of trusted brands, and they can't get through, or they can't get through to the right person. So there's been a real disregard across many sectors for customers. So SMEs that use technology in the right way to find out how their customers are feeling, to develop their plan and their strategy, will be the most successful businesses on the other side of this. If you don't understand what your customers are after and you don't do that research, I love Daniel's point around making sure your cash flow is there. You won't have the cash flow because customers won't buy. They won't want to buy what you've got. And look, profit is vanity, isn't it? Cash flow is sanity. to use an old Boots term that I used to get thrown around all the time. But in reality, that cash flow won't come through if you're not connecting with the right clients and the right customers. And the last 3 months have shown us the businesses that have done that consistently well have got and have managed to pivot, that great word that we've all come to know and love, that have pivoted their business model to react to customer needs, and continue to do that going forward in their plan, will help them be successful. And there are 3 key things that will help businesses move forward from a customer experience perspective. You have to put the customer centricity, your thought process about what your customers want, at the heart of your plan. That will then drive your marketing plan. That will then drive your cash flow plan. That will then drive your overall direction and strategy, because you'll know what the strategy looks like. And the only way you can do that is to be clear about measuring your current performance, to understand what you need to change to make your future performance for your customers and your clients where they need it to be. I talked at length a few months ago within this series about the various different journeys your clients and customers will go on when they choose your brand, or potentially choose your brand to provide a solution. So you have to have the voice of your process. Your process needs to be really clear, and that's where technology plays a huge part in that. If you've got a slick process that's backed by great technology that customers understand and can use, that's a really critical point. If they can't use it, they won't use it, and they won't use your brand. So technology has to be simple. You need to wrap that process in the love for your client and your customer. If you don't do that, customers will walk away and they will go and find a simpler brand to use. To Alison's point, if your employees aren't engaged and don't understand your processes and procedures on that journey, they won't understand it, and therefore they won't promote it to your customers in a way that is coherent and to help your customers understand and buy from you. And ultimately, you have to ask your customers, when you implement something new in your organization, you have to test. If you don't test and you don't check in with your customers and you assume that everything is all right, you will not see the issue that is coming over the horizon that could bite your organization on the proverbial backside. So those 3 voices in your client journey have to be measured, they have to be tested, they have to be simple. And organizations that haven't done that in the last 3 months are failing, they're falling over. It's really interesting, the local high street is flourishing again, because for many years they have seen and learned from the mistakes they've made, and they have really understood what their local population want, and they've pivoted quickly to be able to deliver that. And they're a great example of small businesses getting hold of technology, using it really in a really savvy way to reach out to their customers to understand what they want, and they've pivoted and made those changes. So the plan, my top tip, the plan has to be customer centered. If it's not, it won't work.
Thank you. I think that's a very clear message. So thank you for that, Ryan. That's great. That's brilliant. Tom, could I come to you next? So, we're hearing about how technology is at the heart of a lot of these changes. The companies are making a lot of changes, sometimes on really fundamental things like the basics of where people are working and how they are continuing to work. Are SMEs building up risks for the future, and is now the time to tackle these? So I'm thinking of areas like customer data, cybersecurity, health and safety, and so on. What are your thoughts?
Thanks, Siobhan. Yeah, it's an interesting one, and it's a time that no one has ever seen before. So a phrase that lawyers like to use is precedent, and so there's precedent for this and there's precedent for that. This is what's happened in the past. We are living in unprecedented times. We've got a number of things going on in the world which are completely unprecedented. The removal of the United Kingdom from the European Union, alongside a national and international pandemic situation with potential, lockdowns in certain areas. And I think it's been discussed today, really impressed by how quickly businesses and individuals have adapted, and humans have an innate ability to adapt. And sometimes that adaptation is a make-do attitude. And so we will find ways of working remotely, even if those ways are sort of a halfway house. So the answer from a lawyer is always going to be the same. It's going to be, well, it depends. But the issue here is balance. yes, you definitely need to be ahead of the curve. If you want your business to success in whatever this new normal is, you're obviously going to be just as you were in a business before lockdown. You're going to be ahead of your competitors. But you don't want to be so far ahead that you're at the bleeding edge where you're at risk of falling into traps and having breaches. And you don't want to be so far behind that you can't keep up. So you need to find that sweet spot. And that balance is really, really difficult to achieve. Probably most interestingly for me, at least, is I'm this morning sat in our bundle and deeds preparation room. So behind me normally on these empty shelves, each shelf would hold 4 boxes, each with 2,500 pages in preparation court bundles, completely empty. In the course of 2 months, the entirety of the court system has gone from a paper-based system to a digital-only system. So if an archaic system such as that can change that quickly, that gives you an idea of how quickly we all need to move. Now, the courts did that, and they went down a very, very secure route known as email. And businesses need to be considerate as to what their secure route for things is. Part of that is down to, as I think was mentioned earlier, breaches are going through the roof because people are working from home and they have more flexibility and they can do more of what they want. That's great. And an element of that is about trust. And an element of that is about cost. And it's that constant fine line of balance. What works for the organization? What works for the staff? What makes, as Ryan said earlier, what makes customers happy? What's simple for the staff? What's the training going to look like to get the staff on board? How easy is it for use? What's, loads and loads of stuff. So we recommend at every juncture there is some consideration put towards it. If you're running a business and you've got the strategic view to do that, then you're doing it already. But it's also now a legislative point. You need to be able to document your decisions in relation to how you treat your data. And now that is more important than ever. Emailing court bundles is one route, but it's not the only route. And there's lots of different ways of doing things. So every organization needs to prove that it's considered everything. And it's not allowed to make decisions solely on cost. Picking up on the airline point earlier, the British Airways have been fined twice by the Information Commissioner's Office for failing to look at other alternatives to data storage because of cost. They just went for the cheapest route. Cheapest is not always best, as we all know, and that needs to be factored in. And I think at the moment, businesses may be smarting in the next couple of months on cost, and cash is king, as mentioned earlier, absolutely true. But if you throw a small amount of money away initially and then end up with a significant fine, you're going to look silly and you're going to lose brand reputation. That's the other part of this, is as we move into this completely digital landscape very, very rapidly, the consumer base that you will be dealing with will be far more digital savvy than they've ever been before, because they are forced to be. So the reputational risk that comes from your online trade is now considerably higher than it ever was before. So you need to think about, and this is probably what everyone's been saying this morning, you need to think about what you look like, not just in person, but online. You want to think about every single iteration of your brand's reputation and how it interacts with everybody. Because it's not just a case of the Information Commissioner's Office issuing you a fine for a data breach. It's a case that you might have a talk-like situation where 142,000 people walk out the door the next day.
That's really interesting, Tom, and you've shared some quite staggering and slightly daunting information there from looking at those empty shelves behind you is just incredible. And actually that leads, well, this absolutely. So there's an environmental benefit, which is good to know. It actually leads quite well to a follow-up question, which I'd like to involve Julian with, which is, Julian, what Tom's just described, and in fact what everybody is describing today, does kind of really highlight the role that technology plays across every area of our business. So how do SMEs get to grips with this when there is still uncertainty and change all around us?
Yeah, absolutely great question. I don't think there's definitely not a simple answer to that question, but it is great to hear everybody else's opinions and views and how, for me, technology at least is linked to all of these different things that we're talking about and kind of underpins them. I think businesses need to look to their customers. They need to look at their internal people. They need to ask questions and be curious about how technology can help them. We always work with a kind of a 4-step sort of plan when we've implemented technology, and that's around reviewing its purpose in the first place, developing it in terms of finding out what needs to get done and who needs to do it, through moving into implementing it, and then reviewing it. And this is, I think this is the bit that lots of people fail on. They put a system in, and then they just forget about it, and they leave it alone. And for me, it's always about, you get the most gains from going back, finding out what didn't work, and improving on that, and moving forward. So it's a really difficult thing to kind of sum up, I guess, in a simple, succinct way. But again, I like Ryan talking about measuring your performance and measuring your output. And I think unless you do that for every step of the process, you're not going to really know what success looks like one way or another in relation to how technology is supporting all of the things that we're talking about. And yeah, I think it varies to pick up different points from different people. But I think the key thing for me is you have to kind of plot where you are right now. Be honest with yourself, and think about where your technology gaps are, and where technology could help improve. And as I said before, consider every aspect of what you're looking at, from your people, your customers, your suppliers. Understand how technology might help. And it's not always the right answer. I think sometimes you can put systems in, you can overcomplicate things, and as Ryan said, if you for want of a better word, cock up the customer experience, people will leave and move on. So it's important, and that goes back to that point of measuring what you're doing and when you're doing it, really, and then going back and adapting and changing as you move forward.
Yeah, that makes sense. Thank you, Julian. So I have a question that I'd like to put to Vikram, if I may, which has come in on the Q&A. So we've been asked a great question by one of our viewers today, who wants to know about how things are moving towards remote working and thinking globally. Does this mean that we're slowly moving towards a 24-hour business ethos? And if that's the case, is this now feasible to have multilingual, multinational employees who work remotely? And are there any trends on this? So from an international employment point of view. Vikram, I know I'm springing this on you, but I think that you might have your finger on the pulse on this one and might be able to share a view on this.
Thanks a lot, Siobhan. Funnily enough, I was literally writing a reply to that question as you asked me. I think that there are a number of different factors at play here. I think there's one which Steve completely recognized is because of remote working and the ease at which we can connect with each other, are we going to be working 24 hours a day? But I think there's, and that goes with the flexible working perspective. I'll give you my own personal experience. When I worked at Intel, we were expected to work with every region, major region in the world, because we were given collaborative goals, and I'm not going to go back down to what the collaborative is, but we were given goals between all of the major continental regions that we jointly owned, which meant every week we had to have meetings to discuss who's doing what and why. And so we had a system of what's called share the pain. So one week, Hong Kong would have the meeting at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, which would mean late at night for San Francisco and very, very early morning for me, 6 o'clock in the morning for me. At 2 o'clock my time, it was late at night for Hong Kong, very early in the morning for San Francisco. But we then worked around those hours and then flexed our time during the day in terms of when we were in the office and weren't in the office. So we're going to have to work through this life to figure out what's a good balance. Mm-hmm. The fact that we're going to actually get a much more global workforce. So this whole concept of visas is almost going to disappear, I think. So you can talk to me in 15 years' time if I'm still on this earth, to say, are visas the correct way to go? I think visas as a working, a work permit is going to slowly become irrelevant, because the good companies are going to hire based on talent, no matter where they're based. And it's cheaper just to fly someone in for a few meetings every month, or once every, a few times a quarter, than it is to bring them in and all the associated costs. So I think the talent market is going to become much more global.
And of course, we have the technology to make that happen without the travel.
Absolutely.
So, brilliant.
And
Thank
so
you,
in
Vikram.
terms of the cultural question, I think I've run out of time, so I won't tackle that right now.
Well, maybe you could carry that on in the LinkedIn group after the session.
Yeah.
I'll plug for that group there. Okay, so thank you. So our poll results are in now for our second poll, and I'm hoping that these will pop up on your screen any minute now. So we asked you what the biggest challenge facing you right now. Oh, that's very interesting. So almost everybody is talking about attracting new customers. Retaining existing customers and financial issues are there as well, but that's really interesting that that is a ubiquitous challenge for everybody. I think we're all nodding our heads that that's something that feels quite familiar, and it's going to be interesting to see how that works in a more virtual world rather than that's in real life world. I was having a conversation with somebody the other day, and I couldn't remember the word for not virtual. I was like, what is that thing when you're not doing it virtually? And I just couldn't think of it. And I was like, oh, that's just real life. So yeah, it feels a long way away, but it will come back. So let's hope that those customers and that pipeline development becomes easier as well. Okay, so thank you for your thoughts during that conversation. I'm just going to give us a quick summary now of what we've talked about. I've been scribbling down lots of thoughts and lots of the comments that our panelists have made today, and I hope that that's been useful for everybody, because what we've talked about for me feels like that we need to almost have a little bit of patience, that this is an evolution. We are where we are, but one of the things that comes across as the theme with what everybody is talking about is that this is an evolution. We have to keep adapting and being flexible. But our staff are evolving. We need to understand their journeys and keep that human factor involved. Our customers are evolving. We need to understand what things are like for them now. We need to research and test and really probe into what they want and they need. Our marketing needs to evolve because it's essential that we keep doing it, but the world has changed. So we need to make sure that we are keeping pace with all of that. The business communities around us are also evolving, but they are there for us to lean on. And I think this webinar series is a really good example of how business communities are getting together and supporting each other. And of course, technology is evolving and how we use it is evolving. So it's essential that we keep on the pulse of all of these things. But that for me seems like a theme that's come through everything. Julian, can I ask, how does that feel to you? Does that feel like a reasonable summary? What would you say to that?
Yeah, I think you've perfectly summed it up, really. Actually, not really wanting to repeat what I said, but I think everything else around people, customers, finances are essential. But really, technology can be used to underpin these things and help, I guess, move forward quicker and really aid the recovery as we move out of the situation that we're in. As we said, it's important to have a plan, but not be afraid to adapt it and adjust it, quickly as we move forward.
Yeah. I mean, there are certainly challenges ahead, but perhaps having that roadmap and that plan in place will give us all a sense of control. That we do have a progression journey in mind, and that we can evolve and change that as we need to, but we're not starting with nothing. We definitely have something that we can build on going forward. So thank you. So we are just in the last few minutes of our session today. So my challenge now is to our panelists to very briefly give us that one final thought that they want to leave with everybody on the call today. So I'm going to come to everybody in turn. You probably have about 30 seconds each to share your thoughts. So I'm not going to wave a timer at you, but brevity is key. So Julian, what would you want that one final thought to be for our listeners today?
For me, the one final thought is build a plan. It's simple as that. But make sure you include every aspect of your business, from people, customers, suppliers, marketing, sales, everything, finance. Make sure that every aspect of your business is considered in terms of your plan moving forward, and assess how technology can help with that journey as we move forward.
Great, thank you. Alison, what would your thought be?
Okay, yeah, very similar plan, and have people at the heart of your plan. Be inclusive, so engage with your employees and get them involved in it as well, and understand their ideas, understand their contributions, because never before has employees stepped up more than they are stepping up now, and they'll probably come up with some things that you won't think of.
Great. Thank you. Dan White, could I come to you next?
Yeah, I think just a specific part of planning rather than just repeat a message. I think it's important in these times not to just get carried away with trying to be the cheapest you can be. I think be confident in the service of a product that you're offering. Don't just try and, or what I like to call, race to the bottom and try and be the cheapest in the market, because you're just going to shoot yourself in your foot. Be confident in what you deliver, be confident in your service, and price appropriately, not cheaply.
Great message. Thank you, Dan. Thanks very much. Vikram.
Charles Darwin said that it's not the most intelligent or the strongest that survive, it's the most adaptable. So my closing message is change because you want to, not because you have to. And of course, my personal angle on that is people are at the heart of that change. They don't have the correct skills or knowledge, not behaviors. It's less to do with knowledge, it's more to do with skills and behaviors.
Great, thank you. Next, Dan Pritchard this time.
Yeah, I think for me, it's building on all that positivity. You do things, be sensitive, but push on. You've got to know your brand niche. You've got to own that. Involve your people, as you said, to ensure it's a shared journey for the best chance of success. But that positivity, build that into your plan and push that on.
Brilliant, great, thank you. Ryan.
Yeah, I think my tip will be, if you're going to have a plan and it's going to be an effective one, make sure it's planned through the three voices I talked about. So the process is right, through the technology, your people are engaged, because that will create a great customer experience for you to be able to get your customers to buy more from you. It is about what customers value. Daniel is absolutely right. It's not about price. It's what they value about your brand, to Dan's point. And quite simply, you want to make it as simple for consumers to get into your brand, to get what they need from your brand and get out quickly. It needs to be simple, because that will create the greatest experience for them.
Great, thank you. And last but not least, Tom.
Well, normally a lawyer would say, don't take any risks, but I would say calculate your risk. Consider where you can afford to look at risk, and consider where you need to be conservative. And it is balance.
Great. Brilliant. Thank you. Thank you all so much. All of our panelists, you have shared so much value today, and I think we're all really grateful for everything you shared with us. Julian, before we finish today's session, would you like to say a few final words?
Julian, I think you might be on mute.
Yeah, I was. I was hoping I was going to get away with not doing that, but anyway, apologies. Yeah, so thanks, Siobhan, and thanks to all the panelists. I really appreciate your input, and thank you for everybody for joining. I really hope that you found what we talked about useful. I'd really like to encourage you to check out the Technology for Success website and feedback your thoughts, and let us know what more we could do, what would be useful to you in your businesses. Definitely complete the survey if you haven't already, again. And lastly, I think we've put together a sort of a 2-page document which has got 3 simple steps around developing a technology strategy, which we hope will be a starter for everybody to use in terms of getting you going on that journey. So we'll be sending out links to that following today, but it will also be available on the Technology for Success website. So once again, thank you all the panelists, and thank you everybody for joining as well.
Brilliant. Thank you, Julian. So thank you everybody, again, just to echo Julian's words, thank you everyone for joining us today, and for our panelists. look out for that email, because those resources I think are going to be really useful for everybody. Our challenges are no doubt going to continue for some time to come. I think that's clear. But I think we all hope that you found the information shared today to be really useful, and across all of our sessions. And you know, I hope that they've added some value to some of the challenges that you're facing, and how you plan for those and for your future, for your businesses. We will say goodbye for now. Thank you all. Good luck and stay well, everybody. Thanks. Bye-bye.